Welcome to day 2 of our daily Bible devotions. This week, we are talking about handling objections. And if we want to contextualize our handling objections, we have to think objections to what? So there must be an argument first before we examine the objections against those arguments. And for the past couple of months, we talked about the theistic arguments. In general, we talked about three kinds of theistic arguments. First is the cosmological or argument that God exists because of cause. And then the teleological, cosmological, teleological. The teleological argument argues that God exists based on design of the universe, and then design of the design of life. And then most recently, we talked about the moral argument. It's the argument that God exists because there is this standard of morality. At the end of all these arguments, they only make sense if there is a God who caused or who started everything, there is a God who designed, and there is a God who gave a moral standard. Now, to be clear, the objections presented to this argument objects to the kind of God that is monotheistic, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Let me clarify again. The objections to this argument do not just object to just any kind of God. Okay? If you're an atheist and you object to these arguments, you have to clarify first, what kind of God are you rejecting? What kind of God are you objecting to? Because there are many atheists, to be honest, there are many atheists who object to these arguments, but they don't even know what they're rejecting. To look at the general objections against these arguments, they are actually objecting to a specific kind of God. This God, again, is monotheistic, meaning one God, not many gods. And then omnipotent, meaning all-powerful. Omnipresent, meaning all-present or present everywhere. And then omniscient, all-knowing. And then omnibenevolent, all-loving and all-good. Now, the way they object to this is that they ask, if this God, monotheistic, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, if this God exists, and He is omnibenevolent, all good, now why would He allow evil? And evil is not just pain and suffering. Evil is like people murdering others. There's rape. There's problems. This evil conducted by people against other people, why does this kind of God allow this? If He is powerful and He is able, why is He not stopping this evil from existing? And there are specific answers or responses to this kind of objection. One of these responses was mentioned in a good way by the author Frank Turek. Listen to him.
I have a book called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. You're saying, what are they stealing? Well, atheists say there's too much evil in the world. Well, the problem is when they say there's too much evil in the world, I always ask them, what do you mean by evil? And they'll typically try and give examples. Well, murder is evil, theft is evil. And I go, no, I agree with you, but I don't want examples of evil. I want a definition of evil. Well, it turns out you can't explain evil or you can't define evil without reference to good. Because evil is actually a lack in good or a privation is good. Evil or privation in good. Evil is like cancer in a good body. If you take all the cancer out of a body, you got a better body. If you take all the body out of the cancer, you got nothing. In other words, evil doesn't exist on its own. It only exists in a good thing. Well, here's the problem. If there's no God, there is no ultimate standard called goodness. What we mean by good is God's nature. So if you're going to say there's evil in the world, you're implying there's good in the world. But when you're implying there's good in the world, you're also implying that God exists. Now, it doesn't necessarily prove the Christian God. I think if you do enough research, you realize the God we're talking about, the God who is the ground of good, is the Christian God. But the only point that I'm making is that when atheists claim there's evil in the world, they actually have to steal a standard of good in order to even know what evil is. So evil only exists if good exists, and good only exists if God exists. So if you're an atheist and you're going to say that evil disproves God, you actually have to steal from God in order to make that argument. That's a self-defeating proposition.
Now, Frank Turek made a good point. If you're objecting to the theistic arguments by using the term evil, you have actually already assumed a standard of good. So in a sense, Frank Turek is correct that this objection is self-defeating or self-contradictory, because by saying that there's evil, that means they have appealed to a standard of good, and this standard of good, based on the moral argument, makes sense only if there is a God. Now, this kind of response to the objection, I would say, missed a little bit on what some atheists are really saying. Now, on this part, I'm gonna go a little bit on the side of the atheist. Listen to me. If you want to object to something, you have to make sure that you have listened properly to the objections or to the arguments. What is wrong with this world? Listen closely. What is wrong with this world is that we are so eager to say our piece. We are so eager to object. We haven't listened enough. And not just atheists, but even theists, even Christians, even believers of God, they are guilty of not listening enough. Now, I think the response of Frank Turek is very good, but I think it missed a little bit on what the atheists are really saying. Now, the atheists are saying that there is evil when they appeal to a moral standard. It does not necessarily mean that they are stealing from God. Now, again, Frank Turek is a good person, very intellectual. I think he just missed a little bit. Because when atheists appeal to a standard of good, some atheists do not assume the existence of God by appealing to a standard of good. They say that there is this standard of good, but there is no God. It's like, it's like when you're walking and then you found money on the street, you pick it up. You did not steal it because you found it, but there's no owner. So you took it. So these atheists, in a sense, they appeal to a standard of morality, to a standard that they found. But they're not saying that this belongs to God. So they did not steal it, in a sense, because they just found it. Now, again, they did not steal it, but still, somebody owned that standard. I think that's where the atheists miss. If you are going to appeal to a standard, that standard exists because it was imposed upon, it was created by a higher intelligence. Like in the game of basketball, if you're going to play and there's a foul and you want to contend the foul, you appeal to who? The referees. And then the referees, they appeal to a commission. There's this external group of people who decides what is good, what is not. And even if you're not stealing that, it still belongs to someone else. Even if that money that you found along the street is not stolen, even if you did not steal it, that money still belonged to someone else. I would say that the proper response to the objection that if God exists, if He is good, why would He allow evil? I believe this is the proper response to that. God is good not because He takes away evil, because evil is created by mankind. Now, if He takes away evil, then He takes away man. But He loves man. Now, evil is created because mankind fails the test. And God, if He will take away the evil, that means He will take away the test. He will take away mankind. But God is good because He's loving. He's loving enough to give them the test. And then teach them, train them to pass the test. That's what God is doing to us. And He's being very patient with us because He is all good. He is all loving.